Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Book Club. We're discussing Anna Jacopetti's book, Trust Children, Natural Learning for 21st Century Students. And we're going to talk about chapters 2, 3, and 4 today.
That's a deep dive. So let's go right in. I want to ready for you. Yeah. Ellen, just yeah, good. I want to know what your thoughts are. Uh, Kaylee, if you can unmute yourself, it'd be great. Uh, everybody, so we can just have a conversation, listen, and just join in if something comes up for you.
Uh,
uh, I'd
s-
like to
some of
start.
some of us have background noise, so if we need to
Right.
stay on mute.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so, what did you think? How did Ellen go?
I was really excited. I figured out how to highlight on my Kindle. So, so in chapter 2, my favorite sentence was, "But we must hold our alpha role of responsibility and leadership with humility and deep respect and love for the young human beings in our charge." I loved that because I always say, when I taught preschool, it was always, they're little humans. And then I'd see after school, they'd run to their parents' arms, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to them like they're an adult. And just that mutual respect and that we're experienced, but we're not bitter. So I just loved how you said that.
Thank you.
And one other thing on that page, I also highlighted presencing, and that came up this morning. Remember in our in
Yeah,
for those.
this morning I thought,
Yes.
uh, and I like to do that when what you bring is more important than what I present. It's what comes out of you really hearing. Uh, so for you too, Karen, join right in terms of this idea of attachment is something we don't talk about very much, but it's so profound that the children come in, they will attach. It's a necessity. You come in needing to attach. They found that babies that were not held and attached to someone, orphanages died. They did not thrive, even though there was food and da 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 da. There needs to be a primary attachment. Yeah, go, Karen.
Yeah, and I've been studying Prussian history and the Prussian education system and how I'm just sort of contrasting that sense of um, isolation, the intentionally removing young children from their families. It's the same model that Indian residential schools were modeled off of Carlisle Institute, which was modeled off of Prussian military education academy kinds of things. And so just thinking, and even if you think of like elite British boys' schools, like what King Charles went to, how intentionally broke the, kind of created trauma for children by separating them from their families and creating, the indoctrination and cult techniques, really. And so, doing the opposite of that is what's good for children.
And that's still the model for our public schools.
Yeah, yeah.
It's you know, the reason we have this kind of structure where you go from grade to grade, and there used to be huge classes, bigger. Um, it's what Steiner was reacting against and hoping that he could transform uh, education in general. It wasn't, he didn't, he didn't really see little, Waldorf schools as islands in a larger C. He said that his work with education in children was for this time when we would be facing really severe challenges. It would be most important because I've been reading oh golly, that's my memory. I've been reading a book, Dwayne Elgin's book. I don't know if you've seen it. It was recommended. Joe really liked it. He's a futurist. And he was looking at the options that if we're going to have transformation, if we're going to be able to transform the way we live and really step to this moment, the way that Joanna Macy talks about it, or Joe, to step to this moment, we need to have that kind of fullness from the children that are growing up who are carrying the capacity to, and will be the ones who are responsible for really making the deep change. We can only sow the seeds and try to support it at this point. So to me, this is critical. It's so important. And have any questions about that? How I do want to recommend looking at Neufeld's website. Gordon Neufeld is the one who really developed attachment and what you have to do to make attachment with kids. Yes, he's Canadian. He co-authored Hold On to Your Kids with Gabor Mate, who has done so much work on trauma. And of course, Gabor had discovered that out of all of the drug addicted people that he was working with, they were all traumatized. They all had serious trauma that he needed to, and that the drugs were just self-medication from something deeper that needed to be addressed. And that, so we don't want to add to the, it's, and it's so important for learning. I don't know if you had the experience I do, but I was thinking about my teachers. And I have all these teachers that are gone from my memory completely. I don't remember anything about them. And they didn't give me anything, except the next step. And I was one of those star type students, I worked hard. So I got good grades, but that didn't mean that it was such a joy when I found the teachers that connected with my life. And they stayed in my life. As old as I am, one of them just died at the age of 97. So, questions about.
I was going to check to see, is this better? Am I still having background noise or interfering with? Because I think it was disrupting Anna's, that noise was making it difficult to hear Anna. One of the things I was curious about, you were talking a lot about the relationship, the sort of mutual learning relationship between the student and the teacher, but then you actually spent a good amount of time also talking about the relationship with the parents and that there's work on, and that the parents, parents are like encouraged and somewhat involved in the education of their students, but it seemed like this philosophy really had a different way of understanding what it means to engage parents and actually seeing parents, that there's some kind of healing process or some kind of processing process that parents go through that in a way is its own form of education. And I was just curious to hear a little bit more about how that actually plays out in practice and what some of the challenges are around that, because it seemed like a pretty essential piece, and yet I'm when this happens within sort of a culture in which parents are stressed, they're kind of being pulled in different directions, and it's what you saw in the way of a different kind of commitment maybe from parents than they would make even if they really cared about their kids' education in other contexts, or yeah, what the challenges were. Just any reflections you have on that.
Yeah. That it was harder with the parents than it was with the kids but it's the same process. It took me a while to understand that. And I'm glad I came to taking this class through at the end of my career rather than somewhere way back in the beginning, because I understood by that time how essential it was to form a circle around the children, a real circle. So the parents had to come together, and they were on all ends of the spectrum, you know, some of them no television, nothing, and others all the way to the other end. And so what we had to do was look at what the guidelines were going to be so we could bring the children together and trust each other, make rules. It took a lot of energy, a lot of listening. Nobody's right or wrong. And I took them through a lot of things that I did, going back and remembering what it was like when they were 9, or talking about childhood, or looking at the changes. We did it together. And it was challenging right through to the end, but we did it. I think, it also gave me support. There were a lot of challenges in the school, particularly toward the end of the time I was there. And I had a group of parents that supported me and what I've been doing. Uh, so it was worth the energy I put out.
Mhm.
It was a lot of energy.
Mhm.
I wrote a lot of letters. I wrote a lot, you know, uh, had a lot of conversations. But you are not a family when you have particularly when you're going for 8 years. It matters to those parents what you're doing, and get to know each other very well.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like with the kids in some ways, right? You get to know the parents a lot better as well, right? Because you
No, also it helped me understand the children and what their problems might be,
and you
and
rebuild that trust every year, or to yeah,
that
that's
we could work together then, but not making the parents responsible, but helping them deal with their own issues with the kids.
mhm. Yeah.
I'm thinking about how my grandmother, when she was with us, um, she as like the matriarch of the family, or I don't know, the self-appointed auntie who mailed a monthly newsletter to the extended family for decades that kind of wove together these threads of, like cousins that lived in different states, and it really was the glue. Some people do things like that with like holiday cards and things like that, where they're keeping the threads of communication together. And I'm reflecting that Anna's investment of that kind of energy in the school family, so to speak, is that same kind of weaving and reminding and creating that identity and sense of community.
And then they made it possible for us to do all kinds of things I couldn't have done without them.
Mm.
So, you know, we went on tons of field trips. We got out of the school. We got into the woods. We hiked. We climbed. We did all kinds of stuff. And that was parents. And of course, the parents were affluent enough to be able to make the space to do that. I also had some very talented parents. I had Pete Sears in my class, or the pianist. I don't know if you know Pete's work. He was an amazing musician. He was with the Grateful Dead for a long time. Uh, Gary Malkin, the same, another major musician. And so I had help. But nothing, that's the core, that's the plate, that's the structure, those relationships. And it's continual. And it's a way of living that and then it spills over. We can look at how that connects with community. Ellen, do you have anything, or Kaylee, you want to ask or that you're thinking about?
I do have a question. I was wondering how supported you felt, either structurally or like with your specific administration. Like, did you feel supported to put in this investment of time and energy into the parents? Was it something that was kind of inherent to your job description, or was that something that you kind of felt over time? And then, how did the school support that?
Well, Waldorf schools can be kind of crazy places. But there were periods where I felt very supported and periods which everything was going upside down. College of Teachers was supposed to administer the school. Everybody was overtired. For it to really work, you were supposed to leave your ego at the door because you could make a whole program and put it out, something good for everybody, and one person could stop it who didn't, you know. So there was a lot of, and we had boards, and depended on where the board was at. So during some of the time, I felt supported and shared, and there were other blocks of the school that somehow, you know, it wasn't always easy. So it was important to be there to have my class. I did a lot of that work myself because I saw that for the kids and for me. For example, I graduated the biggest class that had ever graduated that school. And some of the classes were down to 6, 7 kids by the time they hit 8th grade. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't work with the whole system, I had parents who stayed there rather than moving so that their child could finish with the 8th grade. Mm-hmm. So it took a personal investment. But it can also be supported by the school. It depends on the faculty and how it's being run.
I'm keeping an eye on time, and I want to make sure we can give kind of 20 minutes to each chapter.
Sure.
If there are any
20 minutes to the last chapter, but these two chapters flow together. The community, and you can see how building community happened out of the attachment. The two, if you're going to build a community, you've got to have a strong attachment relationship. And because then the kids they begin to take care of each other as they get older. then everything that you're doing gets amplified, and they begin to act independently. And I had wonderful things happen, you know. I remember you remember that huge flood? This was 2005.
Mm.
The flood in, where was it? It was in the
You mean
God.
Katrina, Hurricane Katrina?
No, it wasn't here. It was oh, I can't say it. It's gone from my brain for the
The
moment.
tsunami in Thailand or
Yeah,
Japan?
there was a terrible flood and tsunami, and my class, all on their own, decided that they would send money to support people. And they organized healthy snacks at lunchtime and
Mm.
got the whole class organized to bring this food. And then they sold it at lunchtime, and they did it all themselves. I had nothing to do with it, except to say, good, go ahead. It's your thing. You're doing it. And they earned what, $5,000 or $6,000 that they sent.
Mm.
They're just little kids still. Um, you know, that kind of collective action. They're still connected. They still visit each other. Many of them know where they are, and a number of them are still best friends. And that's after leaving my class at 8th grade. They
Mm.
sustained the relationship through different high schools, they're in all over the place right now. Uh, and I still Zoom with them occasionally. And they're in their early 30s now, but they're sharing their lives with each other. They know a lot about each other. So I was hoping maybe I could get one of them to pop onto this book club and just talk about it.
That would be interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
Like from their point of view, I don't know what they'd say. Yeah. So questions about the community part.
Mm.
Anything? Ellen, you're quiet. I want to hear. I know you know a lot about this and that you care about teaching. So speak.
Well, I worked at a private progressive school for 15 years in nature. It was on 14 acres. It's called the Little School in Bellevue, Washington.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I was the movement specialist, so I taught every child. So I could teach a child from age 3 to 12 if they stayed in. So I did have a Waldorf-esque experience, and we did multi-generational. There was always older kids helping the younger kids, and they established good relationships that way. And you brought up something about how they all had money. This school, Microsoft land. So, it was a wealthy school with wealthy parents. So that meant for finding the balance between their expectations, because they support the school, and the philosophy of kid centers, place-based, holistic learning, and not, your child doesn't read at 7, that's okay, and getting them to buy in. Oh, your child likes Pokemon cards. Let's let them bring their Pokemon cards to school because they're reading, so it's getting those alternative approaches that is important. And now with social media, it's really great because I have a lot of my students are also old. And I just had a football player at the University of Washington. So that was really fun to watch an old student. He's literally ran my classes when he was older because he was such an athlete. And that's what's fun about being in this type of program is we can grow and learn from the children and then let them actually teach us and help us.
Because, you know, I had to change. They took me, they figured out that they could affect the way I am and make me over. And they would work on me. Boy, they would, if I wasn't shaping up, they would let me know, you know, um, in a sweet way. But it's at the same time you have to hold them. So I liked what you said about the quote you liked. Yeah. Kaylee, thoughts? This is more new to you. You're coming at this from a different point. What are your thoughts and questions?
Thoughts and questions. So I'm coming at this as a new parent and then also somebody who, I've kind of touched the education system. And I remember there was a point in my career where I was kind of at a crossroads. This is just speaking to myself, and I saw what was happening in public schools, and there was just like something very deep in me that said, this is not the way I want to be a teacher. And so when I read a lot of your stories and a lot of your rationale for why that is, it touches me deeply because I remember having those thoughts kind of almost subconsciously about teachers need to form attachments with their students, but there are so many parts of the public education system, at least the way I experienced it, which is very when you were talking about I was a straight A student, but I don't remember anything about my teachers. I didn't really get a lot out of it. Like I very much relate to that. Um, and I really like the some of the suggestions that you made for how you could use Waldorf principles in a public school context. So, for example, creating cohorts, even if it's around like interests, just like student groups that will kind of mature together consistently over the years. Um, but then a lot of these, I'll be honest, like I feel very pessimistic that the public school system as it stands now could be reshaped with some of these principles because there are just so many forces that seem to keep it from happening.
Yeah.
So it's not like any one group of people, it's just the way that the system has sort of emerged. So I was
I
wondering if you had any
understand
thoughts.
too that it's come from the right, that this whole push, we had pushed it very far toward being open. We had open classrooms. They were multi-age stuff going on, all kinds of experimentation in the 60s and 70s. And it came down on us in the 80s with Reagan. And it hasn't turned around since. And it's being controlled by the testing.
Hmm.
You really want to change this. It's challenging. People aren't talking about it yet. I couldn't get the book published with the regular publisher, not even Haymarket. You know, it's challenging this system. This is the core. The kind of testing that they're doing pushes the curriculum in a direction and kind of stops. Now, I'm watching in the charter schools, which are public based, but they're Waldorf instruction. And they're having to do the testing and they just don't pay much attention to it. And that they're, what happens is the kids don't do well in the third grade at all. But by the time they're in fifth or sixth, they begin to take the top off of things without teaching to the test. So it's hard to, it's a hard problem, but if we're talking about regeneration, if we're talking about the next system, a different way of learning, this is essential. I really appreciate that Joe makes it so important because everything depends on the children. They're the ones that are, I wish I was passing on something a lot easier to my grandchildren than we seem to be doing. I just feel the core work of this. This is why I went back. I've been a climate activist for years. And I went back and wrote this book because I felt it was so important to the whole picture. And I wanted to write it not just for Waldorf type things, but as a way to begin to work. I think it's possible. I think it's possible. We're coming very quickly to a lot of change, and I think that we'll have a little more control if we take it locally.
Kaylee mentioned like, or I'm sorry, I don't remember who was talking about intergenerational, maybe Ellen, about like within the school, the older children helping the younger children. But I'm what I'm discerning from what's happening in Colombia with the children at Sueño del Bosque is that it's sort of opening up to be community education and for all ages and for elders and children and working age people and or however you categorize different ages of our lives that and uh so I'm curious about things like the school of the city, you know, taking the bus to libraries and parks and having events and like mini immersions that are tied together with networks of homeschoolers or, you know, ways of having small elements that complement into larger times when people come together and then being more in that small, like from my understanding of education, the way of having like 12 to 15 people at a time, you can't, it changes the dynamic to have it much bigger. And as we can see with even five of us, it's kind of, a little bit different dynamic when you're smaller than that kind of sweet spot of around 12 for like the course dynamics. And so I'm inviting you to, comment on that, like kind of deconstructed school.
I'm not sure the forms it'll take. I have a former student that I taught at Summerfield in the high school who now is running a forest school. It's a school out in the forest on Yaka'ama. It's on indigenous land and has an, little indoor area they can go into and sit and talk. He's got a lot of kids that can't function, boys who aren't going to be able to sit in a chair and be quiet, lots of ADHD type kids. And they're all learning and it's a wonderful program. It's so good because they're all out looking at things every day and they're owning and connecting to this beautiful area that they're in. I had one little boy, he's about 8 or 9, took me, he said he wanted to take me and show me some very important things. So I went with him and he showed all this stuff to me, very excited. Then he looked at me and said, "And you were Mr. Allen's teacher?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you did a good job." So, I mean, it's happening. It's there. It's all in. This is a big movement now in the UK for schools getting back out. It's a matter of seeing where it's going and going with it, Karen. It's a way of weaving together. There was a lot of homeschooling. There still is. It's hard for people though, because now it's gotten so expensive, for example, to live in Sonoma County. I was just talking to a close friend who's now the administrator at Summerfield, which is the major Waldorf school here. And they're having a very hard time keeping enrollment up because of the rising cost of housing and God knows what, we're going through this period which I think a lot of it is going to be playing by ear, not by ear, but by what happens and building, but connecting with other people who have common understandings or wishes for their children and coming together. Particularly if you have experience teaching, it's amazing what you can do. So I think that it's, and how to integrate the academic aspects that what they need to learn about math and writing and reading. You don't want to eliminate that out in the woods, although what they're learning is the connection. How do you weave that in a way that is organic and natural? I think it's challenging. I was going to go and see how Tim's doing it. Again, I'm curious. Uh, so we can touch into, and then the big picture. I just want to tell you that whatever I did with the kids in terms of taking care of them and finding ways to balance for them, you have to, it's address their challenges. So it's watching for them and not giving up, but trying. I had kids I had a boy who was extremely dyslexic and dysgraphic. And I found out that it's his vision, and he couldn't he couldn't learn to read because letters kept dropping out. He wouldn't see the same words spelled the same way. You have to deal with that. How do you deal with that? Well, he did better with computers. That's where I got in trouble in a Waldorf school. I said, this boy has to have a computer. No, we don't do computers in Waldorf school. He said, well, we do in this one. Class, this boy. Because then he could pull up a word. Somehow it worked better for him. So it's, and I had a boy that I describe a lot, Jasper, who is, of course, very far over on the Asperger's or whatever syndrome. And he was really disrespectful to me. I mean, he went this way. I really appreciated him. I stayed with him. I kept a relationship with him. But it was the other kids who went from being put off by him to beginning to surround him and pull him in, pulling in, pulling in. He was very awkward physically, but they pulled him into all of their games. They did that. I didn't choose that. I watched them do it, and my heart just went, oh. The change in that boy was extraordinary.
Is that the story you told in the book? Yeah, about the boy. Yeah, yeah. I was really struck by that, and just really feeling how, it is sometimes a matter of life and death, right? I mean, in terms of whether people feel that sense of belonging, feel like they have a place, feel like they're cared for, and are like you said, surrounded and part of the circle. And for some kids, that's a lot harder to move into that space, and to create a culture in which the children. Sometimes it just takes, I mean, I'm sure that there were children at all different levels of being able to do that, but even if you have one or two who kind of get it, like it's important that we all feel like we belong together, and that we are, committed to caring for each other. Wow, that's amazing when that happens, it feels like a real gift, you know, to him and to everyone, right? Just what you learn in that process, right? That, yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't something I could do.
Hmm.
This had to come from his peers, had to come. And it wasn't something I could get the other kids to do. You can't. This came out of, that was the big moment for me. It still brings tears to my eyes.
Mm.
It was,
But values, are there, so it's like you couldn't, you know, create that, sort of make people do that, but it feels like if you teach and work with certain values and model certain ways of being with each other, that they are learning that sort of through osmosis, right? I mean, and through your presence.
and you'll always have some extraordinary kids,
Right, right.
some that get it at a deep level and have the courage to go forward with it.
Yeah, it does take courage. It really does take courage, I think, a lot of times. Yeah, yeah.
So it's trusting that. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So reading. Oh
Hmm.
my gosh, all the boys, all those poor boys who suffered through that, including my brother, who was this brilliant, wonderful, creative, intelligent man, who I found in the second grade or something. The teacher had set the children how they scored on one of those general kind of blah, tests. And he was way in the back because he wasn't ready to read when he was 7, even. He was one of those kids that was much closer to reading when he was 8 or 9. Boy, it's often that way for boys. They're really not ready, even. That's why if you start them first grade when they're 7, by somewhere toward the middle of the second grade, almost all the kids, unless there's a tremendous disability, are able to. But I had kids that came to the Waldorf High School that they didn't really know how to read. It's amazing. They could read words, they could recognize all the words, but they didn't imagine anything. They didn't live into it. You're teaching reading, you want to do what children get from a story. You want to be able to read and imagine what's happening. You don't want to just have the words on the page. How boring. It isn't the words on the page. It's the imagery and the feeling and everything that comes reading. Uh, so that requires both hemispheres crossing and connecting. And so everything we did in the first couple of years was to support that, to make sure it was happening for all of the kids, to strengthen it. And it really didn't matter at all. I had kids that started to read. I had a little boy who was reading when he came in at age 5. And the fact that we weren't reading didn't slow him down. It was, it was good for him to do all the things we did too. So it was taking your time with it. And I got from, with the woman that taught Maoris, again, my brain, oh, I hate it. I'm almost 86 and I forget the names of people that I know. And it's just not going to be there. So I apologize to all of you. I'm doing my best with it. But she had taught Maori children, and she found that it worked much, much better when she taught them to write. So learning to write and then going from your writing, things you've written yourself, then you can begin to read that. It's a beautiful doorway. And there's even a book out that we used years ago called The Writing Road to Reading. I did remember that. So
I'm reflecting on a big part of my teaching career was helping college students who had low test scores in reading and writing. And we had different ways of supporting them with uh, we had an integrated reading and writing curriculum that was a developmental course that complemented other courses that they were taking. There were a lot of different methods that they were using, but I'm just so aware of how, well, a couple of things like the trauma of having like some previous teacher tell them they'd never be any good at writing or they just the just an off comment that maybe a teacher didn't realize was going to have kind of a long-term effect on a young person. um and and math as well, dealing with young people whose experience of math is like a traumatic experience of math. So
mhm.
anyway, that's sort of the world that I was in for a long time, and I'm just trying to make some connections about the reading challenges and the affective barriers that people can have to learning when they're kind of resisting a story that they've been told of themselves and overcoming that to become readers, to become, successful in math.
Absolutely. It goes, how, look how many hours you've spent in class by the time you graduate 12th grade, if you do. If you do. And a lot of kids don't because of this. Um, it's that's a life. That's, go ahead, Karen.
It just occurred to me as well that there's a paradox happening right now where book clubs are like cool. Young, all sorts of people are interested in like hanging out with people and talking about books. And so there is a resurgence in this, kind of relationship with the printed word. And also at the same time, I'm going to be helping out this summer with a field school that's for college students at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee here. And those students don't read. They might be able to read, but if you assign them readings to do before class, it is not occurring. And so the people who are doing this school are talking about, what can we have YouTube videos or have ways of kind of summarizing or making the content accessible to a group, to a generation, or for whatever idiosyncrasies. People are some are engaging more with written word, and some are preferring audiobooks or having ways of like being able to do something with their hands while they're listening so that they can, kind of process it better. I loved what you were saying about knitting too. It hadn't even occurred to me about knitting.
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit of a loss with all of this because I look at my own grandchildren and how much time they're spending on this. And, uh, it's, they have different brains at this point. And I don't know where that's going. And I have my concern for it, given my background and what I've done. But also I'm trying to stay open to the fact that they may, I do know it's addictive because I'm a bit addicted to it at this point. I'm up here by myself a lot and it's so easy to pick up my phone and look at what's popping up on my email or whatever. But it's changed. I'm not at all. I don't have answers there, except that I do know that stories, which we're going to go into this next week, are critical stories. And they meet something and address something much deeper. And so being able to read your own story is it'll be a real loss if they can't do that. But it doesn't make the story less important. We'll have to find a way for them to. Audiobooks could be all right. They're really listening. They're imagining as they hear the story. If it's well told, that's fine.
And podcasts, I think, are also, you know, a way a lot of people get information. Just it's a different delivery system. It stimulates, you know, people in different ways.
One of the problems is we don't share the same information anymore. Everybody's down their own silos, and it's a challenge. What are your thoughts, Ellen, and on this one?
I have thoughts on the whole deconstruction of the system. So I'm a real big picture thinker like Joe. I was when I found him in 2020, I was like, yeah, because I was deep in my dissertation research then. And it really, my state, Washington, we have a lot of nature schools. A lot of people are starting to understand the bioregional mind. So it's more and more common. And I I call it dancing between paradigms. It's really hard, right? It's like we're going 2 steps forward, 4 steps backward, spin around. Right now, we're in the spin around in circles, like, whoa. But while we're doing this, the children are still here and they're still watching and they're still interacting and they're still participating. So it's people like us with experience. You know, thank you for writing your book. Thank you for being 86 and out here being our elder talking. I'm a baby elder at 66. Feel like I'm okay, I'm retired now, 40 years of interacting with the kids. I'm, you know, a baby elder. We need to be out here working, and I think it comes down to community. My vision of the big picture is we're going to have some kind of separation collapse where we're going to have to rely on community. And those of us who are good, like I'm really good with the young children, I'm going to have to step in and help play, you know. And so it's like being ready and participating, but still being in this system at the same time. So I just think it's a big mess, and I'm so happy for this school,
Oh, me
you
too.
know.
Oh, to have something positive, to even plant the seeds. I mean, it's
Yeah.
given everything. And Kaylee, I'm feeling for you too, because you're starting out. You have young, you know, it's and yet what a precious time, because you have this vision and these connections, and I think you can trust that they're going to inform you as you go forward with your family at this point. I know there's decisions to make that are hard, but I'd love to know how you feel.
Yeah, no, that was very well said, Ellen. It's kind of dancing between the two worlds right now, seeing the ways that things could go, and then also seeing the resistance. And having to kind of sit in that resistance with everybody else, I suppose. Um, what I mean by that is that like I'm in a context where I don't know, the people around me aren't bioregional thinkers. I am the only one that I know who is interested in all of this. And so I'm just sort of sitting here kind of seeing everything play out around me in my neighborhood, in my community. And I do see some pockets for hope. Like, for example, I think a lot of younger millennials, so in my cohort, they were not aware of the dangers of, you know, unrestricted smartphone and television access. But now I am, I'm plugged into the community of young parents today, and they are much more aware. So I've met lots of parents who their older kids, they didn't restrict it and they didn't see a need to. And now with their like younger toddlers, they're saying, oh, I think there's something off here. Like people's alarm bells are going off um, in that particular area. And so, I think kind of seeing it and just, yeah, being in this community of people who are like have deep, rich life experience with children, and people who also see the bigger picture of things. It's very helpful for me to kind of figure out what my role will be and what my role is today, and also just kind of um, decide for myself what is going to be most important going forward, and trying to bring my child and then as many children as I can with me, I suppose. So thank you for this space. It's very, very helpful.
We've got 5 o'clock. How did we get there? That's beautiful though, Kaylee. Thank you. Yeah. It's a good note to end on. And so for next time, quickly, we'll be doing a little forward here somewhere.
Chapters 5 and 6, the
Oh,
next few chapters.
so we've got telling a story and letting them play. Two of my favorite things. So we'll go there.
Have a great fortnight, everyone. And we'll see you in 2
And
weeks.
please, if somebody you think would really enjoy this, it's easy to slip in. We can expand the conversation. I'd like to see the group a little bigger. Not that you're not wonderful, but it would be good to get a, broader perspective too. So
What
good.
is the date of the next? I may be gone. I apologize, but I may not be able to join next time. I'll double check my schedule, but I'll let you know.
July 10.
Yeah, I'll be away that week. So.
Yeah, I'm going to be away the week after that, but I'm going to do it from wherever I am. So hopefully. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks to my heart. Love to you.
Okay.
You too.
Bye.